regardless of your age or status, you do have a voice and you have power and you deserve to be a part of our democratic process and however you are eligible and however you choose to do so.
This is Hourglass, the podcast for United Way of King County in Seattle. Coming up, our third and final episode of our three-part Get Out the Vote series. This week's episode is about civic engagement. We'll chat with Amanda Sandoval, United Way Director of Systems Change and Public Policy, on how you can make your voice heard through civic engagement on Election Day and all year long. We'll also discuss United Way's Our Neighbor Fund and an upcoming volunteer opportunity. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for tuning in. First, here's a special message from United Way of King County's President and CEO.
Hello, this is Gordon McHenry Jr., President and CEO of United Way of King County. At United Way, we work side by side with communities to build an equitable future for everyone, and we do this through services, partnerships, and advocacy. And we know that these are not enough. We must be civically engaged at the polls, in public hearings, and in our communities. November 5th is our nation's Election Day. Amid the polarization, hate, indifference, and intimidation that have seeped into many facets of our society, we believe that voting still matters. Our elections are an incredible opportunity for us all to be seen and heard in terms of our expectations of those who represent us in local, state, regional, and national government. We commend all those who have already voted in this year's election. If you're registered to vote and have not done so, please do. Don't allow this opportunity to make your voice heard pass you by. Our votes are not just for us, they are for our families and our communities. They are for those who don't have their own voice in our democracy, those that don't have homes to receive their voter registration or ballots, the young people who are not old enough to vote, immigrants and refugees who are not eligible to cast a ballot and who need a voice. If you're entering this electoral process with anxiety or fear, please know that this community, the United Way community, supports you in overcoming that anxiety, that fear. Know that you will be supported when you take action to vote, and as we all continue to hold our elected leaders accountable to their responsibilities and their oaths. And it all begins with civic engagement. Be active, stay active for you, your family, your community, and our nation. Thank you, and now back to the Hourglass Podcast.
We begin our discussion on civic engagement with a look at America's voting rights history. Voting rights for people of different races and genders was allowed in many states as early as the 1700s. New Jersey, for example, allowed all people, including those of color and women, to vote as early as 1776. But by the mid-1800s, most states restricted voting to white men. Then came the 15th Amendment to the Constitution in 1870. It reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." So that meant all people could vote, right? Well, wrong, because the 15th Amendment says nothing about voting rights for women. So in 1920, the 19th Amendment was added to the Constitution. It reads, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied by the United States or by any state on the account of sex." So that means that by 1920, all women and men had voting rights, correct? Well, no, because the 19th Amendment applied only to white women, not women of color. And the 15th Amendment didn't apply to those who were not considered U.S. citizens, such as indigenous people or those of Asian descent. It wasn't until the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 that all people of Asian ancestry were given the right to become citizens and thereby granted the right to vote. The 24th Amendment of 1964 eliminated poll taxes that had been used in some states to keep African Americans from voting in federal elections. Then came the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965, which guaranteed voting rights for Black women, Indigenous people, and Latinos. Revisions to the Voting Rights Act made voting easier for people who didn't speak English and made it possible for people of color to vote without being subjected to intimidation or literacy tests. These amendments and acts would not have been possible without civic engagement, which simply put is the practice of using strategies and activities, sometimes political, sometimes social, to improve the well-being of our communities and our society. Civic engagement takes many forms, the most common of which is voting. But first, you need the right to vote. Throughout American history, voting rights were granted, extended, and reinforced through civic engagement that included activist movements, such as the women's suffrage movement, the abolitionist movement, and the civil rights movement. There are many other ways to be civically engaged to support voting. You can conduct voter registration drives, distribute information about ballot initiatives, take people to the polls, or volunteer at polling stations on Election Day. But civic engagement does not end on Election Day. We must hold our elected leaders accountable and make sure that they craft and implement policies that benefit our communities. That's why the First Amendment of the Constitution, which gives people the right to peacefully assemble for redress of grievances, is so important. We exercise that right when our civic engagement involves testifying at public hearings, writing to our lawmakers, gathering at the state capitol on lobby days, and engaging in protests and demonstrations in response to unjust laws and unjust treatment by our government. At United Way of King County, we take seriously our part in civic engagement. As a 501c3 nonprofit, we cannot tell people who to vote for. But we can and we do strive to keep people informed about the policies affecting our region. We advocate for systemic change to address the harmful policies and the structural racism that have impacted our communities for generations. And we make our voices heard through our work with the state legislature, our blog posts, and our op-eds and editorials in traditional media. Our desire to keep people informed and to encourage them to be more actively involved in public policy is the whole purpose behind this 3-part Get Out the Vote series, which concludes with this episode on civic engagement. Amanda Sandoval, United Way Director of Public Policy and Systems Change, has led our Get Out the Vote discussions, and she's back to lead this one. Amanda will discuss ways people can be civically engaged year-round. She begins by focusing on those whose civic engagement can play a major role in the electoral process, even if they're not eligible to vote.
High school students often think if they're not 18, they can't vote, they don't have a role, and they're kind of lost as to what their contribution is during election season. But actually, high school students have a huge role. They can pre-register to vote. They can mobilize their peers who are 18 and can go vote. They can be information sharers, register voters, volunteer at polling stations, do canvassing, phone banking. And I would say high school is actually the perfect place to have these really important conversations with your peers, and you can reach them regardless of post-secondary plans, regardless of party affiliation, and regardless of socioeconomic status. And so this is really like the perfect platform to talk to your classmates and talk about how why voting is important and about candidates and just like civic engagement in general. Statistics show that the more high schoolers are taught about our democratic process and how voting actually works, they are A, more likely to vote, and B, they're more informed. And so a lot more states and school districts are pushing to have some kind of like civic engagement, democratic process class, or even have just like a voting 101, because the more you know, the more informed you are, and the more you'll actually encourage classmates to go out and do it and just have a better understanding of how voting and elections impact us.
It's interesting because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can get your driver's license in this state at 16, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if I'm a high school student, I'm driving and all these laws are being made about the roads, I can't vote, but I want to do everything I possibly can to make sure that I can impact some of those laws, right?
Yeah. I would say like high schoolers, college students, there's so much more politically active nowadays, especially with like social media, having marches and demonstrations. They're so much more engaged and are doing a lot of like grassroots advocating. And so I would, invite them and encourage them to cover all your bases and to make sure you're also voting. You can go to rallies and demonstrations and do social media and stuff, but also the other half of it is like to vote, to understand, to be informed, to talk to your peers, to help make changes that way.
And then similarly, we have a population of undocumented community members who often feel powerless during election season. But again, that's furthest from the truth. There's so much they can do as well.
Yeah. And I think the biggest role for them, similar to those young students who can't vote, is really being trusted messengers, and especially in our BIPOC communities, in our immigrant refugee communities, having a trusted messenger or a trusted community leader really lead those conversations is important. And especially in a lot of these communities, there's just distrust of government and of the process, and just a misunderstanding of how it works. And so being able to be that person to answer questions and to help people understand the issues and what's at stake is really important. And making sure your community feels empowered, understands how our democratic process works, helping get people registered to vote. Again, they can help people register to vote. They can canvass, they can phone bank. A lot of people help family members make a voting plan. And actually, in a recent survey, 94% of DACA recipients said that they plan to use their voice to encourage family and friends who are eligible to vote to do so and help them make a plan. And outside of the DACA recipients, other undocumented community members say, they are the ones that have stories and are the most impacted by election seasons. And so it's really important for them to share their stories and educate people on what election season means and how it impacts our daily lives.
Now, we know during this election cycle, and actually in prior election cycles, there's been an attack on the presence of undocumented people in our country. Naturally, that would drive fear and discomfort for someone who might be looking to register people to vote.
Yeah, I think this is one of the easiest states to vote in. It's super accessible, and there's so many community orgs and just community partners who are committed to helping people make a plan, to help them use their voice, and can help translate your ballot and can help explain things. And, I know that there's been a lot of misinformation about undocumented community members voting, but the truth is undocumented community members cannot vote. There's no data to show that they are actually voting. And so I think that just feeds into this disinformation. And as you said, is stroking some fear in community members. But we have some really great orgs who are doing this intentionally and getting out there and making a plan.
Those organizations include the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, or WISN, a coalition of more than 400 immigrant leaders, allies, and immigrant-serving organizations that supports and builds power for immigrants and refugees across Washington state. WISN Executive Director Brenda Rodriguez-Lopez says WISN operates a statewide importation defense hotline and is activated when immigration's customs enforcement officials are in its communities. She says that during election years such as this one, its immigration's defense hotline sees an increase in calls reporting immigration's custom enforcement sightings, raids, and detentions across the state.
Just this year alone, we have had reports of all those activities in 15 cities, including Toppenish, Spokane, Pasco, Tacoma, Tukwila, Blaine, Wenatchee, just to name a few. And so this increase in immigration enforcement is not a coincidence. This is a result of the anti-immigrant discourse that we are hearing at a national level. And the promises of mass deportation of building a wall and further militarizing the border. Let's remember that Washington is a border state, and those plans have a direct impact at a local level because that means more immigration agents at our border. That means more agents separating our families and more people being detained at the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. That is why when we talk about protecting our democracy, we need to broaden that analysis and think beyond casting a vote. It must include immigrants regardless of immigration status, which oftentimes those efforts are only focused on organizing citizens on behalf of immigrants. And that cannot continue to happen. We must be at the table strategizing and being part of the solutions to the issues that our communities need to thrive. Through our stories, we get to share the impact the policies have in our lives. And while many of us can't cast a vote, we do have families and friends who can. And therefore, undocumented people also need to be politicized on how the electoral process works in this country. Honestly, overall, our communities need to be engaged in the political process beyond an election year. And we cannot be an afterthought. That is how we get to truly transform the political power and landscape in our communities.
Amanda says that spreading the word about voting rights has often helped people discover their eligibility. In recent years, many formerly incarcerated residents have discovered their eligibility once they paid their debts to society. But some are still unaware of their voting rights.
We've been saying all along, Washington State is one of the easiest states to vote in. And we make voting really accessible for as many groups as we can. And so in Washington State, those with prior felony convictions can vote. The law passed in 2021, and that you can vote. Your voting rights are restored immediately upon release. Prior, the law was a little bit different, and you had to make sure you had no fines or fees, or you had to be off of parole. But that has since changed, again, since 2021. And so now, as soon as you are released, you are eligible to vote. And so, unfortunately, not a lot of people know that the law has changed. And so in Washington State, we have 24,000 eligible residents who have prior felony convictions. In last year's 2023 election, only 414 voted.
Wow.
It's a huge voting block. And I think the biggest barrier is people just don't know. The law has been changed recently. There hasn't been a lot of information shared or a big push. And so, there's some really great advocates and organizations that are trying to get the word out there. They are pushing jails and prisons to have voter registration drives, to do information sharing. They want them to do automatic voter registration when people are processing out into community. And really just working with partners to let people know that, hey, like, you have this right. It is restored as soon as you are released, and encouraging people to use their voice. And especially like our young community members who may have served time. They have so much so much knowledge to share. And they know probably more than others how much laws affect us directly in our communities. And so, yes, in Washington State, if you have a prior felony conviction, you can vote as soon as you are released into community. And so I would tell people, regardless of your age or status, you do have a voice and you have power and you deserve to be a part of our democratic process. And however you are eligible and however you choose to do so. But, your voice is important and it's needed. And so would really encourage everyone to get involved.
And lastly, what are some ways that we can stay civically engaged all year long?
Yeah. Our democratic process happens 24/7, 365 days a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say stay informed, not just around election season. I think it's easier to find information during election season because you're seeing it a lot more often. And there's like more panels and social media and like stories and stuff. But there's things happening all year long with your local school board, with your local city and county council. There's stuff that's happening at the legislature, obviously during legislative session, reading the news, supporting orgs who are doing really great work. I would say being informed and just understanding that this is a year-long 24/7 process, and to remind people that, the people that we vote in the legislature, they represent us and our city and our county and our school members. They're supposed to be representing us. And so I would always encourage people to reach out to your local electeds. They are more than happy to meet with you. A lot of them have like coffee hours within their district, or they'll have open office hours. You can email them. I would really encourage you to build those relationships, because they are representing you and they're supposed to be representing the community and the needs that community has.
For more information about United Way's work around systems change and public policy, log on to uwkc.org/what-we-do. Our neighbors are doing their best to keep food on the table, but it's not been easy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, grocery prices rose to their biggest increase in 50 years. Most of the federal dollars that addressed the food crisis during the pandemic are gone, but grocery bills remain high. That's why United Way of King County has launched the Our Neighbor Fund to invest in strategies that will feed families in the coming year. Our Neighbor Fund will help expand our home grocery program to provide 5,000 families with free groceries each week, and it will help an additional 100 schools in King County implement the Breakfast After the Bell program, impacting 49,000 students. We're asking you to please make a gift to the Our Neighbor Fund so that we can serve more of our neighbors. For more information or to make a donation, log on to uwkc.org/donate. Join us for the Holiday Exchange with Community Passageways on December 7th from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. at 306 23rd Avenue South, Suite 101 in Seattle. Here's a chance to roll up your sleeve and take action against homelessness, hunger, and poverty. You can help United Way grantee Community Passageways assist their neighbors with all-day festivities, including painting and games. For more information, log on to uwkc.org/events. At United Way of King County, we are working side by side with communities to build an equitable future for everyone. Hourglass United Way is a podcast that highlights how we and our partners spend time making a difference in our communities. Our work is made possible by the generous donations from people like you. Please send comments and suggestions about our podcast to hourglassunitedway@gmail.com. To learn more about our work or to support United Way, log on to uwkc.org. I'm your host, Joe Burris. Thanks for listening. Until next time.